And isn't it, if you think about our families, one thing that led me down this chain of thinking was that my own family came here very poor from Slovakia and the hill country of Central Europe. Began as miners and as, what do you call it, part-time laborers. You know, you have work, we'll do. And nonetheless, found it possible to prepare a life better for their children, usually along the lines of education. And their children, for us, my generation, they couldn't have done that in Slovakia. It was very hard to get my grandparents even to talk about the old country. It's not that they hated it, but they didn't have altogether happy memories. And they certainly knew they might have worked harder there, but there wouldn't be as much fruit from their work. You could work here, maybe not as hard as there, and you get so much more benefit from it. And so they were really grateful to this country. This is that new economic system which appeared in history, and which is the glory of the United States to have been gifted to launch in history. It's the freest economy based more on invention and discovery and enterprise than any other economy in history. And I'm certain in this room there are 20 or 30 people here with ideas for new businesses or new products who are determined to become entrepreneurs. It's true all across the country. And the birth of these new businesses is where we get our employment. 80% of the new employment in the United States, the employment, comes from firms that employ 50 or fewer people. And there's just a tremendous changeover and tremendous activity at the bottom here in the United States. It's quite remarkable and the most dynamic force we have. Now, you'll see I've been talking, therefore, about democratic capitalism as a three-sided system. It's political freedom from tyranny, economic freedom from poverty, and it's moral cultural. That is, it absolutely must be based on certain habits, moral goals, moral principles, or it all shears apart. And moral visions, roughly Jewish and Christian. That is, both the sense that human beings are social beings. That's why our founders fought so hard for the Union. It wasn't each state for itself. It was the Union that would keep us free. And that's why we've been such a community-centered people all around this country. Every city I know of has dinners every year honoring the outstanding citizens who have made the greatest contribution to the city, to the common good. That's what we do. Now, I want to make one more point, shifting to a new topic. The new moral calculus. It used to be, the Bible said, the poor shall always be with you. And until the founding of the United States, people in Europe believed that. What shocked the Europeans about the United States is that here was one part of the world where the poor didn't stay poor, but became, by the standards of the world, rich. Not necessarily rich, but they owned property, and they lived in a kind of plenty for the time. And that had never happened before. And so that's what created for Marx das Sozialproblem. How do you account for the poverty of people elsewhere? And what can we do about it? As I point out, that's the wrong way of asking the question. Wherever you ask it that way, you will impoverish people. The right way to ask the question is, how do you go about creating wealth on a sustained basis from the bottom up? I've mentioned the achievement of China and India in the last 30 years. And it's just going on. I mean, the movement out of poverty is just spectacular there. If you see satellite photos of India, particularly at night, it's amazing the lights everywhere that didn't used to be there. And to a growing extent, at least parts of China. Lastly, I want to point out some gains and some differences of democratic capitalism and the idea of distributism and social democracy, democratic socialists. One of the things that capitalism has established in the world is that every individual is a source of wealth. That was Lincoln's point. Every individual is a source of wealth. The cause of the wealth of nations is what individuals carry around in their head. And if you have the right conditions, if this wealth is educated, instructed, brought out, allowed to flourish, they become enormously beneficial to their country. Even countries with no real natural resources like Japan. The only thing it's got is good weather for rice. No energy. No great vineyards, good orchards. But where people organize themselves around mind, they can do amazing things economically. It's not slowed up by quote, overpopulation. The most crowded places in the world, like the Netherlands, are among the most prosperous. Because the cause of wealth is the population. They're not the problem, they're the solution. Is that a warning sign? Am I about to be, if we're about to, I'm almost finished. So every person, the idea is that every person too become an owner. And that I think is shared with distributism. I think we may have the highest proportion of households that own their own property of any country. And our aim is to expand it. In fact, that's how we got in trouble with Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. They tried to push more people into homes than could afford them. But it was a good motive. It was a good idea. They lost their prudence and their care. And then social democracy, with social democracy or democratic socialism, it shares some of the main analytic points and purposes. Human beings are social animals. You need a system that is social, in fact global, in fact universal. Just like the Catholic Church is universal. The Catholic Church is the first globalized institution. That's what Catholic means. And we needed to develop a political order that was also universal, which is what the regime of human rights started to do. After the Jesuits of Salamanca got it started, their program in natural law. And we needed to do it economically last. And it's beginning to develop. So the aim is universal affluence, put a firm base, material base, under every woman and man on the planet. And the means for this is personal creativity and charity and association. It's astonishing in America that the more religious people give far more than the irreligious people. The more conservative people give far more than the liberals do. People who believe in the people's capacity to associate themselves, organize themselves in the Red Cross, the Boy Scouts, Hadassah, all kinds of activities. What do Americans do? We go to meetings. What are we doing here on a beautiful, well, not so beautiful Saturday? We're going to a meeting. That's the American thing to do. And if there's a problem to be solved, we put our heads to it and try to solve. That's an active social life devoted to the common good in our particular part of the world. Well, I am probably going over. A professor only has 50-minute thoughts, and to ask him to speak for 30 minutes is real torture. Thank you.